In this video, I'm going to talk about some books on poetry. Not books of poetry, but rather books about poetry. In other words, the mechanics of a good poem, what makes a poem successful, how is it structured, how is it crafted, and then therefore what we might learn about that by reading these books. In the same way perhaps that a student of film studies might not only watch lots of films, but also read books about the process of actually making a film. That's why I find reading about poetry equally engaging as reading collections of poetry, but in a different way perhaps. The first book I'm going to talk about today is one by T.S. Eliot, a titan of the modernist movement. And this is a collection of essays entitled On Poetry and Poets. And in this book, Eliot addresses many different themes and subjects, such as the musicality of poetry, poetry and drama, what makes a classic. And in the second section, about individual poets, he discusses the work of poets such as Milton and Yeats and Byron and other poets too. So very engaging. The essays were written in the 1950s, so for that reason the language style is a little formal, but still it's a very engaging book and very accessible to the contemporary reader. The second book I want to talk about is this one. It's called The Art of Poetry Writing, a guide for poets, students and readers by William Packard. William Packard was the editor and the founder of the New York Quarterly, a literary journal, and in that capacity he read over 50,000 poems. And so you can imagine that he's probably someone that knows a little bit about what makes a good poem. And in this excellent book, which is packed, by the way, with very useful information, it's very dense, there is a lot to unpack. But in the book, he talks about metrical poetry, free verse, and there are also 30 wonderful poetry prompts to sharpen your technique in both formal and free verse. In Mary Oliver's excellent book, Rules for the Dance, the author provides a handbook for readers and writers of metrical verse. It's interesting to note that Mary Oliver herself, as a poet, was not really a formalist at all. She was a free verse poet, and yet she knew a great deal about poetics and the history of poetry. One of the things I think we often, I won't say get wrong, but are maybe perhaps unaware of, is the extent to which cultural conditioning flows through us onto the page. And so by addressing the way poetry was, by looking at the mechanics of poetry, we can see where we are as poets today. There are lots of very useful insights here regarding the structures of received forms, and I highly recommend this book. One of the things I particularly enjoy about Barbara Drake's book, Writing Poetry, is that it is packed full of poetry prompts. And she does that in the context of chapters that address different themes, such as, if I can just grab I don't need my glasses, the use of memory, lists and catalogues, observation and image, meditation and metaphor, and so on. Later in the book, she looks at forms, formal and informal, but actually the majority of focus throughout is on free verse writing. And as I said, it's packed full of prompts, so it's a very useful book to have on your bookshelf and in your hand. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this video, and if you are, please do click on the like and subscribe button. You can also click on the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description below and on the Patreon link. Okay, back to the discussion of books on poetry. Barbara Herrnstein Smith's book, Poetic Closure, is a study of how poems end. What the author says early on in this book is that telephones stop ringing, babies stop crying, but poems don't stop, poems end. And by thinking about the way a poem closes, we can learn a lot about what comes before, and in many respects that's what this book does. It looks at the whole of a poem, not just at how it ends, but what precedes it and how poems successfully or unsuccessfully reach a conclusion. Interestingly, she also discusses in the book spatial art, things like paintings and galleries and pieces of sculpture. We never consider those things ending, and yet within the spatial there is also something of the temporal. When we look at a piece of art hanging on a wall, we take in the information and we arrive at a place. In a similar way, when we reach the end of a poem, we arrive at a place where we consider the piece of artwork as a whole, but also as a dynamic piece of art. And it really is a fascinating book. You won't find poetry prompts in here, but you will find lots and lots of information on what makes good poems successful. And I highly recommend this excellent book. In many respects, the next two books I want to discuss, and the final two books I'll discuss in this video, are really polar opposites, and yet, they both do very similar things very well. So let's talk about them. The first one is called A Primer for Poets and Readers of Poetry by Gregory. This is just the most fantastic survey of techniques, free verse techniques, and how to craft a successful poem. And it's also full of very, very useful poetry prompts. But the focus throughout, as I said, although there is a brief discussion of formal poetry, what Orr is really focused on here is crafting a brilliant free verse poem, or rather helping the student or the poet to do just that. So we have this book, and then I mentioned this polar opposite, not really, but here's another book which does something quite similar in many respects. The excellent book is The Ode Less Travelled by Stephen Fry. And what Fry does in this book is to explore formal poetry, received forms, whether they are closed forms such as the sonnet or open forms such as the terza rima. You will learn everything you need to know about how a formal poem is crafted, and there are lots of poetry prompts in this book too. So these books together, I think, are a really good representation of an exploration of techniques in both areas of formal and free verse. Once again, thanks for watching, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and as you've probably guessed, I'll be back soon with more poetry content.